and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 556, and today's date is January 2nd, 2015, and the title of this episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Now, let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, out in Europe, we understand that every single country is hurting, and it's spreading. And right now, the Eurozone manufacturing is doing a lot worse than they thought. They saw that it is growing at a slower pace than they first estimated in December. And we know this for a fact that we've seen something like this before. And if we go back to 1929, Europe was falling apart. It was in a recession/depression. Here in the United States, the stock market was hitting all-time new highs at around 400 points. Fast forward to today, what do we see? We see the entire Eurozone completely falling apart in a recession/depression. Each country has its own problems. A lot of countries there are in a depression, some are in a recession, some are entering a recession. And as Europe completely falls apart, what do we see here in the United States? Well, we see the same thing that we saw back in 1929. The stock market hitting all-time new highs. Instead of 400 points, we're hitting around 18,000 points. But we see the same scenario rising here. Now, here in the United States, what do we see? Well, U.S. manufacturing. It printed at 53.9. It missed expectations, falling for the fourth straight month to the lowest since January 2014. Market is out there, and they are warning. This suggests a slowdown, and it could become more entrenched as we go through 2015. So it does not look good. Companies are citing greater uncertainty about the outlook. And if we look even further than that, U.S. construction spending in December dropped 0.3%. They expected to rise 0.4%, but instead it dropped 0.3%. This is the biggest monthly drop since June. New orders, that number came in at 53.5. This was the lowest number since before January of 2014, when they told us the snow and the bad weather was the problem with the economy. That's why the GDP was so low. Well, guess what? There really hasn't been that much of bad weather. And again, when the bad weather does hit the United States, it hits in certain sections. It doesn't hit the entire country all at once because, as we know, the South, the Mid-South, the West-South regions, they're really not having bad weather, and there's nothing wrong in those areas. As we know, the United States, Saudi Arabia have been suppressing the oil prices, putting pressure on Russia, Venezuela, Brazil, and many other countries. Now, there's companies here in America, because it's having some type of boomerang effect, because they're saying, you know something, since the oil prices are going down, it really doesn't make any sense to keep the drilling going, and they're calling off the drilling until oil prices rebound. And because of this, the job situation, not because of the oil workers and not because they're doing less drilling, is the surrounding businesses are hurting. The services that pop up around these drilling sites, like restaurant, bars, construction, and more, are feeling the slowdown as well. People are not visiting these areas. They're not coming into the areas. Businesses are not growing in these areas. All of a sudden, everything has come to a standstill. Now, we understand the president has been working for a very long time to establish relations with Cuba. Now, is this a bad thing? No, I don't think so, but it's part of a different agenda. It's not what everybody thinks. And we can see right now, and as we know, Russia, China, they have been involved with Cuba. Russia has been talking with Cuba. They've been exploring for oil. They've been talking about setting up a base in Cuba. And of course, here comes the United States, because as we know, wherever Russia and China are, the United States has to follow. Now, Cuba produces over about 50,000 barrels per day of oil and relies on Venezuela for around 100,000 barrels per day. However, since oil prices are being suppressed, Venezuela's economy is reeling from the oil price suppression. Cuban officials want to avoid the impacts of sudden drop in Venezuela's support. The commitment by Cuba and the U.S. to normalize relations may allow Cuba to buy more oil on the open market instead of Venezuela. And of course, as Cuba purchases oil from Venezuela, they don't get any type of piece of the action because they can use any currency and they don't have to use the U.S. dollar. And this is why the United States has been trying to get into Venezuela, trying to overthrow the government, to place the natural resources on the U.S. dollar, and to put in a puppet government. And we can see right now the United States, Saudi Arabia, they have been putting pressure on all of these countries, and we can see this opens up a huge door for the United States and the United States companies to bring expertise and experience to tap into the country's offshore revenues, have Cuba go out to, let's say, the Middle East and purchase that oil using U.S. dollars to pump up the dollar once again. And this is what they're trying to do out there. Now, we understand that this year, 2015, is most likely going to be a really bad year for business. We're going to see a lot of layoffs. We're going to see real estate plunging. Yes, we might see the short-term bump up because they're trying to do whatever they possibly can to prop up the dollar before the main event occurs and the collapse hits. But when we look at the situation now, we understand the bankers, the central bankers, have been preparing for something for quite a while by different legislation that they pass, like insuring derivatives using the FDIC, creating bail-in documents, and each one of the countries copying this and stealing money from the banks to prop themselves up. And when we really look at this, the banksters are stealing our assets in preparation for them to economically survive what is coming. They understand, and they're trying to get as many assets as they possibly can. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that when you put money into the bank, you have transferred ownership of that money to the bank. The G20 nations declared money in your bank account to not be money. Therefore, the FDIC insurance for your savings really doesn't exist at this point, if you really think about it. And also we have to understand, if your bank is hit with some type of cyber attack, the FDIC does not cover that money. The FDIC only covers if the bank goes under. The MERS mortgage fraud is ongoing, and homeowners are still having their homes stolen without legal justification. The Federal Reserve in 2012 began to print money to the tune of $40 billion a month in order to purchase the mortgage-backed securities. The bankers have practiced stealing the secured accounts of American in the MF Global scandal, resulting in the loss of $6.3 billion of secured investment funds. In April of 2013, and we talked about this quite a bit, the bankers are manipulating the gold price. We know they are, and remember back then Goldman Sachs said, hey, gold is going to be going down, everyone should sell. As soon as they did it, Goldman came in and bought as much as they possibly can. Now, the only thing left for the bankers to do at this point is to steal your bank account with bail-ins. And all they need right now is the correct crisis, the event that will allow them to do this. And if you notice, in the past couple of months, they've been ramping up on cyber attacks, blaming it on North Korea. And as we can see, even though they didn't do it, we see Russia, we see China, we see Iran, we see Syria, and of course this is all propaganda. This will fit into their false flag event, and they'll try to convince everyone that it was one of these countries, and as we know, it will be an inside job. And the last thing for them to do is to get at your bank account. How can they do this? How can they steal your money? Well, we know how they're going to do it. It's going to be with a bail-in. It's going to be with a bank holiday. But the thing is, what will America look like following the collapse of the dollar? Well, we know people will lose their jobs, and ultimately they'll be evicted from their homes, and America will see a dramatic spike in the rate of homelessness. There'll be food shortages. As the failing economy reaches the service industry, most of these businesses will fail in a very large numbers. Who will deliver the food? Because we have to remember, we have an on-time type of system that they don't keep anything in the warehouses, in the supermarkets. They deliver it when they need it, and that is it. And when this starts to fail, food will not be delivered to these areas. There will be food riots from those people who did not prepare. When there are food shortages, people are going to be out there. Gangs will be out there Violence will occur. People will get desperate. They'll have no job. They'll have no income. They will be scared. They will not be prepared. And this is why we've been telling everyone to get prepared. Medical supplies, food rationing, weapons, gold, silver, have cash on hand. Get ready to move at a moment's notice. Martial law will be declared. DHS and the military have already practiced all of this. We've seen it all around the country. With all of a sudden black helicopters flying out of nowhere using live ammo rounds to simulate what will happen, to scare the people. Travel will be limited and it will be stopped altogether in areas where the civil unrest is at its worst. And this most likely will be in the large areas. And we can see that the United States government, the central bankers, have been provoking all the countries to push war. This will cover up the economic collapse. It will not stop it. It will mask it to blame on another group, another country, another entity. So the central bankers, United States government, is not blamed. And this is exactly what they've been pushing for. This is what we've been reporting on. And as time goes on, we can see things are actually getting worse as time goes on. Police brutality getting worse. The nationalization of police force. And we can see that more and more local police forces are getting tanks, surveillance equipment, and everything else. Now, there was a poll out there done by Gallup, and what is the worst thing now that the voters are worried about? It's not the economy. It's not healthcare. It's government officials. U.S. voters now have a bigger worry than the economy, than health insurance. It's politicians. They're very nervous about the government leadership. In fact, it's the first time leaders in Washington have ever taken the top spot, according to Gallup. In 2014, Americans were also worried about the government, Congress, politicians, than unemployed or health care. This tells you something. People are starting to realize something's wrong. What is our government doing? And they're actually not even acting like government. They're acting like royalty. That they're on the top here and everyone else is below them. That they're not part of the same system. They're above the law. And you can see from everything they did do, this is how they actually think. Now, out in Ukraine, we understand there's a ceasefire. Poroshenko came in and said, hey, we're going to have a ceasefire. This way we can regroup. We can get more trained military personnel in place. We understand weapons are being funneled in now from the United States, lethal weapon. They have aid coming into the country. And the Donetsk independent supporters have said Friday that a ceasefire agreement was violated by the Ukrainian forces in Donbass more than 20 times during the past 24 hours. And again, the central bankers, they do not want peace in this area. They want war. They didn't get what they paid for. They paid for the southeastern region. They paid for Crimea. They want the entire country, and they're going to mount a major offensive coming very soon. You can see they're just getting prepared for it. They're getting ready for it, and they're using the illusion that they want a ceasefire. They want peace, but this is not what they want whatsoever, and we can see they're preparing for this. Now, out in Libya, in the Middle East, we understand there are two governments right now. We have the puppet government, which is on the outskirts of Libya. Then we have the people's government, which has taken over a large portions of Libya. And the president of Niger is out there, and he's saying, and he's calling on international intervention to end the violent chaos in Libya. He wants the UN to come in, bring in troops, and set things right and bring in the puppet government right back to where it was before. And we can even see that Spain is using this. And as we know, the United States, France, and the coalition, they are getting prepared to go into Libya. And like I said, once they try to sell that oil, not using the US dollar, that is the breaking point. That's when the UN, NATO, the US will maneuver their way into Libya. But the Spanish foreign minister fears the spread of the Islamic State in Libya. The advance of the Islamic State in North Africa poses a real threat to the national security of Spain. So they're already starting this. I am concerned with the Islamic State taking root in North of Africa, and especially in Libya, where the black flags are already flying in several cities. The risk of the contagion spreading across the whole North Africa is very high. This is a real threat to our national security, and this is coming from Jose Manuel Garcia Bargala. This is the foreign minister in Spain, and we can see, and like I said before, the Islamic State is going to be used for every place the United States government needs to get into. This is where the people are rising up, pushing out the puppet government. They need to get back in those places, and they're going to use them to get into those places where they want to go, like Syria and Iran, and we can see they're moving and doing this already. Now, a former leading U.S. military commander asserted that the administration of President Obama worked to destabilize the regimes of Bahrain and Egypt, and he's out there calling attention to this. And now I'm going to say that the Obama administration and other administrations before him destabilized a lot more than these two countries. America thought Bahrain was an easy prey that will serve as a key to the collapse of the Gulf Cooperation Council regime and lead to giant oil companies controlling oil in the Gulf. This is coming from retired General Hugh Shelton, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said the administration drive against Bahrain, racked by Shiite revolt, was led by the intelligence community to destabilize the entire region. Now, we see this happen in many countries. We saw it happen in Iraq. We saw it happen in Lebanon, Libya, Yemen, Ukraine, and many other countries. And they do this to overthrow the government, to put a puppet government in place, to control all the resources in the area. And this is completely ongoing. And they're going to continually do this because they need to prop up the dollar, because more people using the dollar to pay for those natural resources, the more they have to keep in reserve, and a lot less that flow back to the United States, which keeps the dollar propped up. Once these countries decide, you know what, we can pay for this oil not using the dollar, those dollars will float back to the United States. We'll have a lot more dollars in circulation. We will see the devaluation of the dollar and an increase in the cost of products because the value of the dollar will have decreased. Now, we know the cyber attack on Sony was not conducted by North Korea. Again, the Obama administration, the FBI, this is not part of their agenda to admit that, oh, we tricked you, we lied. No, their agenda is to provoke nations. And the only way to do this is to say, hey, you attacked a company, you attacked the United States, we will place sanctions on you. And this is exactly what's going on. Both the FBI and the U.S. State Department were humiliated when it was revealed that it wasn't North Korea, but a disgruntled, laid-off Sony employee that was responsible for the hack. Obama just signed his first executive order of 2015, imposing even more sanctions against North Korea, even though they had absolutely nothing to do with this. And we're not going to see this in the corporate media where, oh, the FBI and the Obama administration were completely wrong, North Korea had nothing to do with this. No, we're going to see that story stay the way it is, and all you're going to see now is these sanctions being placed on North Korea to provoke this nation. Sanctions targeted about 3 entities, 10 individuals, including North Korea's intelligence agency arms dealer, North Korea's representative in Namibia, Sudan, Iran, Syria, and China. And you can see right now the United States has been provoking Russia with sanctions, now North Korea with sanctions. They just placed more sanctions on Iran, and you can see they're continually doing this. They place sanctions on China after that cyber espionage propaganda that they pulled out of a hat where they blamed China. Now again, it is very difficult to detect and track down who actually did something, and to have an IP right outside of North Korea to say, oh, it definitely had to be North Korea, we know that they are lying, that they're using this to provoke war. And we can see right now that the illusionary numbers, you know, those statistical numbers like unemployment, GDP, inflation, and others, those are all manipulated by the government. The stock market manipulated by the government. Oil prices manipulated by the government. Gold, silver suppressed, manipulated by the government. The only thing they can't manipulate is what's really going on in the country. When people can't find jobs and it continually spreads and unemployment goes up, they can tell us it's 5.8%. But when you look around and you know 1, 2, 3 people that are unemployed or had a great job and working at a different job making a lot less money, or working at part-time jobs, or they had to move out of their house because they just can't find work. I know a lot of people like this. When the real economic indicators completely separate them apart and move away from the illusionary numbers, this is when the government has a problem. This is when they can't explain anything. They use weather, they use every excuse in the book, and what we're seeing right now is the Christmas season was awful. We see that they tried to drive down the oil prices to boost this up. Look what they had to do to get sales going. We see real estate completely falling apart. We see more stores closing. We see people being laid off, companies making no profits whatsoever. And we understand that as things fall apart, they are going to need some type of an event. This is why they've been planning. This is why they're ready. This is why they have all of this in place. Because they're prepared. You need to be prepared for what is coming. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.